I never imagined that one quiet morning could break open a truth that would change the way I saw my entire life. Even now, when I think back on it, I can still feel the weight of the sunlight coming through the curtains, the soft air in the room, and the strange heaviness in my chest that I didn't understand at the time. It's almost strange how ordinary moments can become the doorway to something that will stay with you forever. You wake up thinking the day will be just like any other, and then life decides to show you a part of your story you never asked for. I remember waking up early that Sunday because my mother had called me the night before. Her voice had been unusually quiet, like she was holding something back. She told me she needed to talk to me, and she asked me to come by in the morning. She tried to sound calm, but I could hear something trembling underneath her words. I asked her if everything was okay, and she simply said, "Please just come in the morning." That was all. And somehow, that was enough to make me uneasy without even knowing why. I drove to my parents' house the next day, trying to ignore the strange feeling sitting in the back of my mind. The morning was peaceful. The streets were empty. The world seemed unusually gentle, as if it didn't want to disturb whatever was coming. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my father sitting by the living room window. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching TV. He was just sitting there, staring into his hands. That alone told me something wasn't right. When I stepped inside, the familiar scent of my childhood hit me. Coffee, old wood, something warm that reminded me of safety. But that morning, the house felt different. Heavier, as if the walls themselves knew something I didn't. My mom tried to smile when she saw me, but her eyes were red. My dad looked like he hadn't slept all night. I felt my heartbeat start to quicken even though no one had said a word yet. I sat down at the dining table because my legs felt unsteady. My father cleared his throat, but the sound cracked halfway through, like even his voice didn't know how to start. I waited. I tried to tell myself it couldn't be anything too bad. Maybe a health issue. Maybe they were needing help with something. But deep down, a quiet part of me already sensed that whatever they were about to say wasn't simple. It wasn't small. It wasn't temporary. My dad opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My mother reached for his hand and squeezed it gently, and then she sat down across from me. She said my name softly, in the same tone she used when I was a child, and she had to tell me something she knew I wouldn't like. Her lips trembled, and I realized she had been rehearsing this moment for years. Maybe decades. "We need to tell you something," she said. Even now, I remember the way her voice sounded, thin, tired, and full of a kind of sadness I had never heard from her before. I felt something inside me brace itself without my permission. My dad nodded slowly, as if he wanted to support her words, but didn't have the strength to say them himself. "You were always going to find out one day," she continued. "But we should have told you earlier. We know that. We know we should have trusted you with this." I stared at them, waiting for the part that would make sense of the fear in their eyes. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just listened. My father finally spoke, though his voice sounded nothing like the steady tone I'd known all my life. "You were adopted," he said. Just like that. 2 words. And suddenly, everything inside me went still. For a moment, it didn't even feel like he was talking to me. It felt like something distant, something happening to someone else. My mind refused to understand the words at first. I blinked, but the room didn't change. My parents didn't disappear. My father didn't take it back. Nothing shifted visually, but everything inside me tilted so sharply that it almost made me dizzy. What? I heard myself say. The words felt empty. My throat felt tight. I wasn't sure if I was asking them to repeat it or asking the universe to reverse time by a minute. My mom's eyes filled with tears she tried so hard not to let fall. She reached for my hand, and I pulled back, not because I didn't love her, but because I suddenly didn't know how to exist in that moment. I felt like my body wasn't mine, like my voice wasn't mine, like the ground beneath me had been replaced by something unstable, something shifting. "You're our son," my mother whispered. "You always will be. Nothing changes that." But everything changed, even in that instant. And I think they knew that too. They kept talking. They tried to explain. They told me they adopted me when I was 2 months old. My biological mother had been young, scared, overwhelmed. She felt she couldn't raise a child alone. My parents stepped in. They wanted a family. They wanted me. They loved me from the moment they held me. They said all of that, but I barely heard anything. My mind was spinning in a strange, slow storm. I heard their voices, but the words felt muffled, as if I were underwater and they were speaking through glass. Time stretched and folded around me. 30-something years of my life suddenly didn't feel like they belonged to me. I didn't know where to place myself. I didn't know how to feel. They apologized over and over. My mom kept saying they thought they were protecting me. My dad kept saying they were afraid of how it might change our relationship. They said they had discussed telling me many times, but the moment never felt right. They said they didn't want me to feel unwanted or abandoned. They thought the truth would hurt me. They thought silence was kinder. But all I could think was, why did you decide this for me? Why didn't I get to know my own story? Why did you think I needed protection from the truth? I didn't ask any of that out loud. I just sat there, staring at the table, feeling my chest grow tight, my hands grow cold. I felt like a stranger to myself, like someone had taken my entire childhood and shaken it until all the pieces were rearranged. Eventually, the room fell silent. I remember the sound of the refrigerator humming. I remember the distant chirping of birds outside. But I don't remember breathing. I don't remember looking at them. I don't remember anything that came from inside me. I was numb, like my mind had stepped away to avoid breaking. My dad whispered, "Say something." I tried, but nothing came out. My throat felt locked. My heart felt like it had retreated into some corner where I couldn't reach it. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't sad yet. I was simply broken open. I don't know how long we sat like that. Maybe minutes. Maybe an hour. Time didn't feel the same anymore. When I finally stood up, my legs shook. My parents watched me with desperation in their eyes. My mother whispered my name again, but I couldn't look at her. Not because I didn't love her. God knows I loved her more than anything. But because in that moment, I didn't know how to hold both truths at the same time. The truth that they loved me deeply, and the truth that they had lied to me my entire life. I left the house quietly. No yelling. No slamming doors. No accusations. Just silence. A silence that felt heavier than anger. When I got home, I sat in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't move. I just sat there, trying to understand who I was now. I felt like someone had taken the foundation of my life and cracked it right down the middle. And the truth that lay beneath it wasn't something I knew how to face. I didn't call my parents for a few days. They texted me. They called. They apologized. They told me they loved me. But I couldn't respond. Every time I looked at my phone, my chest tightened again. I wasn't ready to hear their voices. I wasn't ready to step back into the world that now felt unfamiliar. I began to question everything. Not just the adoption, but my memories. My childhood. The moments that shaped me. Every time I remembered something simple, like my dad teaching me how to ride a bike, or my mom comforting me when I had nightmares, I wondered if they were thinking about the secret. If they were afraid I'd find out. If they ever saw me and felt guilty. It's a strange thing, to look back at your own life and see shadows where there used to be certainty. I wasn't angry at them for adopting me. Not at all. But I was angry, quietly, painfully, for being kept in the dark about something that belonged to me. Something that was mine to know, mine to understand, mine to carry. Eventually, I started searching for answers. Not because I wanted to replace my parents. Not because I felt unloved. But because I felt incomplete. I felt like there was a missing chapter in my life, and I needed to read it for myself. I went through the adoption records. I contacted the agency. I learned what little they still had on file. I found pieces, small ones, fragile ones, of a story that had been hidden from me. And each piece both comforted me and hurt me at the same time. My parents didn't know I was searching. I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't want them to think I was running away from them. I just needed to understand where I came from. I needed the truth they never gave me. And yet, even as I searched, I felt the weight of their silence follow me everywhere. It was always there, sitting beside me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Weeks passed, then months. And though things slowly became calmer between us, something had changed forever. A distance grew, not intentional, not spoken, but real. A quiet space between my parents and me that we didn't know how to cross. One evening, I sat with my father in the living room. He looked tired, worn from the guilt he carried. He looked at me and said, "We should have trusted you." I nodded because I knew he meant it. But I also felt something inside me twist gently, painfully. Trust isn't something you can rebuild in a single sentence. It doesn't return just because someone apologizes. It takes time. It takes honesty. It takes healing from a wound that you didn't even know was there. And the truth is, I wasn't ready to heal yet. I wasn't ready to forgive yet. I wasn't ready to let go of the part of me that was still grieving the life I thought I had. That was only the beginning of the journey that would unravel even more than I expected. In the days that followed, I found myself moving through the world in a strange, detached way, as if I were watching someone else live my life. I woke up, I went to work, I spoke to people, but none of it felt real. Everything felt dimmed somehow, softened around the edges, as though a fog had settled between me and the rest of the world. I kept thinking about my childhood, replaying moments I had never questioned before. Moments that once felt simple now felt complicated and heavy. It was like every memory had a new layer I had never noticed, a layer made of silence and things unsaid. I remembered being a kid and asking my mom why I didn't look exactly like her. I had darker hair, slightly different features. I remembered how she would laugh softly and say, "Not every child looks like their parents." And I accepted it because children don't question the things they trust. I remembered asking my dad about our family history for a school project. He gave me a vague list of ancestors, stories that now felt like they belonged to someone else. I remembered feeling proud when he talked about the family line, about where we came from, without realizing that none of it was actually mine. Small memories began to feel like clues I had missed. Little details I brushed off suddenly carried weight. I felt foolish for never noticing, even though I knew it wasn't fair to think that way. Most people never consider the possibility that their entire origin story is different from what they believe. Still, I couldn't stop the thoughts from coming. I couldn't stop myself from questioning everything. I avoided my parents for a while, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I didn't know how to talk to them yet. I didn't know what words could fill the distance between us. I wasn't sure how to look at them without feeling that quiet ache in my chest. I loved them, but I was hurt, deeply hurt in a way that didn't show on the surface, but sat quietly inside me like a bruise that never quite fades. One night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. I felt tired in a way I couldn't explain. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. It felt like I had been carrying something heavy for weeks without taking a breath. I realized then that I needed to talk to them. I needed to hear more, understand more, even if it would hurt. Silence wasn't helping. Distance wasn't healing anything. It was only making the secret feel larger than it already was. So I drove to their house again, late in the evening. When my mom opened the door, her expression shifted from worry to relief in a single second. She stepped aside quietly, and I walked in. My father was sitting on the couch, looking like he had been waiting for hours. He stood up, then hesitated, unsure whether to hug me or let me be. The uncertainty in their eyes made my chest ache. We sat down, the three of us, and for a moment no one spoke. The room felt full of things that needed to be said but were too heavy to start. I finally took a deep breath and asked them to tell me everything. Not just the bare facts. Not just the outline. Everything. My mother began, slowly, carefully, almost as if she were afraid of breaking me with each sentence. She told me about the day they got the call, how they had been waiting for years because they couldn't have a child of their own. She told me how she cried when she first held me, how she felt like her heart had finally found a place to rest. She told me how my father carried me around the house for hours, afraid to put me down, as if keeping me close would make the moment real. My father spoke too. He told me how badly they wanted to tell me as I grew older, but never knew how to start. He said every birthday, every milestone, every moment where the truth could have surfaced, they backed away because they feared changing what we had. He said they watched me grow into someone they loved more than they could ever explain, and the thought of shaking that foundation terrified them. They were afraid I might see them differently. They were afraid I might feel betrayed. And ironically, the very thing they feared was exactly what their silence created. I listened quietly, letting their words wash over me. I could hear their regret, their fear, their love, all tangled together in the story they had carried for a lifetime. I knew they weren't bad people. I knew they didn't hide the truth out of cruelty. But I couldn't deny the pain their silence caused. It was a complicated kind of hurt, one that didn't fit neatly into anger or forgiveness. It was a wound built from love and fear, made sharper by time. As they talked, I thought back to my childhood. The bedtime stories, the family trips, the laughter, the gentle lessons about kindness and responsibility. None of that was fake. None of it was diminished by biology. They had loved me in every way a parent can love a child. But love doesn't erase the need for truth. Love doesn't erase the right to know your own story. When they finished speaking, My father looked at me and said something that stayed with me for a long time. He said, "We always knew you would want to know. We just didn't know when." And waiting became its own habit, one we didn't know how to break without hurting you. But we hurt you anyway, and that's something we'll carry. Those words sank into me. There was something painfully honest in them, something that softened a small part of the ache I carried. They didn't defend themselves. They didn't try to justify. They didn't blame anyone else. They simply accepted what their decision had caused. I left their house that night feeling heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because the truth still sat in me like a weight I didn't know how to carry yet. Lighter because the silence between us had cracked a little, just enough for air to move through. I didn't know what the next steps would look like. I didn't know how long it would take to heal, but I knew I wanted to try. In the following weeks, I tried to return to my routines, though everything felt different. I found myself observing families more closely, parents and children in grocery stores, fathers helping their sons with sports, mothers comforting crying toddlers. I wondered how many of those families carried their own secrets. How many children lived their lives unaware of truths hidden beneath the surface. I wondered how many parents convinced themselves that silence was love. I kept searching for information about my biological family, piece by piece. I didn't tell my parents I was still looking, not because I wanted to deceive them, but because I wasn't ready to share that part of the journey. I needed to walk through it alone first. I needed to understand what I was truly searching for. Some nights, I wondered what my biological mother looked like, whether she thought about me, whether she regretted her decision or made peace with it. I wondered if I had siblings out there, people who shared my blood but not my life. I wondered if any part of my personality, my interests, my habits came from someone I had never met. Those thoughts brought a strange mix of curiosity and sadness, as if I were reaching for something just out of sight. But even as I searched for pieces of my origin, I found myself remembering moments with my parents, moments that reminded me why this was so hard. My dad teaching me how to throw a baseball. My mom showing me how to tie a tie before my first school dance. My father sitting with me through heartbreaks. My mother staying up late when I was sick. Every memory felt real. Every moment felt genuine. I wasn't questioning their love. I was questioning the silence that sat beneath it. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized something important. I realized that the truth about where I came from didn't erase the life I lived. It didn't erase the people who raised me. It didn't erase the love they gave. But it also didn't erase my right to know the truth. Both things could exist at the same time. Both things could be part of my story. It wasn't simple. It wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And for the first time since The Secret came out, that felt like enough to keep moving forward. I remember sitting alone in my room that evening, staring at the ceiling while the house around me felt unusually quiet. It was the kind of silence that makes your thoughts louder, like every memory breathes in the dark. I kept wondering how I had reached this point, where every conversation with my parents felt half-truthful, like we were all tiptoeing around the same invisible crack on the floor. I could feel something shifting inside me, but I did not yet understand the shape of it. I only knew I felt heavier than I should have at my age, like I was carrying something I had never agreed to carry. The next morning, I woke up early. I was tired, but my mind refused to rest. I walked downstairs and found my mother sitting at the kitchen table. The sunlight touched her face, making her look older than she did the day before. Or maybe I was just seeing her differently now. She looked up when she heard me, and for a moment, I thought she would say something meaningful, something sincere, something that would answer the questions I was too afraid to ask. But she only said good morning and asked if I wanted breakfast. I nodded, and she stood up quietly and moved around the kitchen. The way she avoided my eyes made my stomach twist. I wanted to ask her why she and Dad had been keeping something from me, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt like speaking them out loud would make everything collapse faster. I waited, hoping she would speak first, but she did not. She simply placed the food in front of me, smiled faintly, and sat back down. We ate in silence. It was not peaceful silence. It felt like a silence full of secrets, like something sitting between us that neither of us wanted to look at. I kept watching her hands. They trembled sometimes, very slightly. I had never noticed that before. After breakfast, I stepped outside and walked until I reached the small field near our house. I used to come there when I needed to think, but that day, the air felt different. Heavier. Like even nature knew something was wrong. I sat in the grass and closed my eyes, trying to make sense of everything. I tried to remember if there had been signs earlier in my life, moments when something fell off, but I ignored it. There were plenty. Too many. I remembered a time when I was 12, when a man at the grocery store looked at me strangely and called me by a name that was not mine. I told my dad, and he brushed it off quickly, telling me the man was confused. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I was a kid. Kids believe their parents. I remembered a fight they once had when they thought I was asleep. I heard my mother crying, telling my father she could not keep living like this. I never knew what she meant. My father told her to calm down, that everything would work itself out. I went back to bed that night shaking, and I never asked them about it. I remembered how they sometimes looked at each other during family gatherings. It was not the look of two people who shared the same story. It was a look of two people trying to hold something together before someone else noticed. I did not understand any of it then. But now, everything felt like pieces of a puzzle that I was finally beginning to see. I stayed outside for a long time. I listened to the wind in the grass, the distant sound of cars on the road, the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. It helped calm me down, but it did not take away the questions inside me. I knew I had to talk to them eventually. I just did not know how. When I returned home, my father was in the living room. He looked up from his chair and gave me a small smile. It was the same smile he gave me my whole life, the smile that used to make me feel safe. But now it felt like a mask. I wondered how many times he had used that same smile to hide something from me. He asked me if I wanted to watch a movie together, but I said I was tired. I could see the disappointment flash across his face, but he tried to hide it. He nodded and said he understood. I went upstairs and sat on my bed, staring at the door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to pretend none of this was happening. But I just sat there, quiet, because I did not know what else to do. That night, I overheard them talking again. Their voices were low, but not low enough. My mother said she could not keep pretending, that I was starting to notice things. My father told her to give him time. He said he would explain everything soon, but he needed to figure out how. She told him that waiting would only make it worse. I froze outside their door, listening. I wanted to walk in and demand the truth, but something held me back. Maybe fear, maybe confusion, maybe both. I felt like a child again, standing in a hallway full of shadows, waiting for someone to turn on the light. The next few days were strange. They acted normal around me, but it was the kind of normal that felt practiced, like they were rehearsing lines in a play they never wanted to perform. I tried to act normal too, but inside, I was unraveling. I could not focus. I could not sleep. I could barely eat. Every time they looked at me, it felt like they were seeing the truth written on my face. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found my mother holding an old photo album. She quickly closed it when she saw me, which only made me more suspicious. I asked what she was looking at, and she said it was nothing. But I knew it was something. Everything was something now. I sat down next to her and asked if she was okay. She hesitated, then nodded. But her eyes said something different. They looked tired, like she was carrying a weight she had been holding for years. A weight she did not know how to set down. That evening, I finally gathered enough courage to talk to her. I walked into the kitchen while she was washing dishes and stood there quietly for a moment before speaking. I told her I knew something was wrong. I told her I had been hearing things, noticing things, feeling things. I told her I was not a kid anymore, and I needed her to trust me enough to tell me the truth. She stopped washing the dishes and leaned against the counter. Her shoulders slumped, and she closed her eyes. For a long time, she did not say anything. The room felt heavy with all the things she was holding back. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. She said she wanted to tell me the truth for years, but she was afraid. She said she and my father promised they would tell me when the time was right, but the right time never came. She said the secret was not small. It was not simple. It was something that would change the way I saw everything. I asked her what she meant. She opened her eyes slowly and looked at me with a kind of sadness I had never seen before. She said there were things about my past I did not know, things about where I really came from. Before she could say more, my father walked into the kitchen. He froze when he saw us. My mother wiped her eyes and looked away. My father knew instantly what was happening. He looked at me, and his face tightened, like he had been hoping he could delay this moment forever. He asked me if we could talk in the living room. I nodded and followed him. My mother stayed behind, standing at the sink with her hands trembling. I sat on the couch, and my father sat across from me. He took a deep breath, then another. He looked older than he ever had. Finally, He said there was something he and my mother had kept from me since the day I was born. Something they should have told me long ago. Something they were afraid to say because they knew it would hurt me. I asked him what it was. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. He said the words slowly, like they were too heavy to carry. And that was the moment everything began to change. That moment felt like the air inside the room changed. My father sat there with his hands folded, staring at the floor as if he was trying to find the courage to keep going. I could hear my mother in the kitchen, moving quietly, but even the soft sounds she made felt sharp in my ears. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the truth he had been hiding my whole life. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, and for a second, I wondered if I even wanted to hear what he had to say. He finally lifted his eyes and looked at me. His face carried a kind of sadness that made me forget, for just a moment, all the frustration I felt. He looked like a man carrying a burden so heavy that it had become a part of him. He said my name softly, and his voice cracked. He told me he never wanted to lie to me, but that life had forced him into choices he never imagined he would have to make. I did not say anything. I just watched him. I needed him to keep going. He told me that when my mother was young, before she met him, she went through something painful, something she almost never talked about. He paused, trying to choose his words carefully. Then he said she had been in a relationship with someone who hurt her deeply. Someone who walked away when she needed him the most. Someone she trusted. My father said he met her shortly after that. He said she was broken in ways she did not show on the surface. She was quiet, scared, unsure. He said he fell in love with her anyway, and he tried to give her the life she deserved. He supported her, helped her heal, and they slowly built a life together. I listened, feeling tension build inside me. I could sense where the story might be going, but I was afraid to say it out loud. My throat tightened. Then he took another deep breath and looked at me with eyes full of regret. He said the man who hurt her came back months later, unaware she was pregnant. That man left again before she ever got a chance to confront him. My father said he stepped in because he loved her and because he wanted to protect both of them from the pain she had already endured. And that was when he said the words that shattered the ground beneath me. He said he was not my biological father. For a moment, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. My mind went blank. My ears rang. I stared at him without blinking, trying to process what he had said, but it felt like the world around me blurred. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped a hand around my ribs and squeezed. I did not know how to react. I did not know how to feel. I felt like someone had turned my life upside down in a single sentence. He kept talking, but his voice sounded distant, like he was speaking from the other side of a long tunnel. He said he loved me from the moment I was born. He said he held me in the hospital and promised himself he would raise me as his own. He said he never wanted me to feel abandoned. He said he never wanted me to carry the pain of knowing that another man had walked away from me before I even had a chance to know him. My eyes burned. I did not know whether I was angry, heartbroken, or simply numb. I had never thought about my identity before. I had never questioned whether the man who raised me was my real father. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike. He was the one who showed up at school events. He was the one who stayed up with me when I was sick. He wasn't perfect, but he was present. He was consistent. He was everything a father should be. But now, a part of me felt disconnected from him, like a thread holding us together had been pulled loose. I asked him why he did not tell me sooner. My voice came out quieter than I expected, almost hollow. He said he wanted to wait until I was older. He said he kept waiting for the right moment, but it never felt right. He said every time he looked at me, he worried that telling me the truth would change the way I saw him. He said he feared losing me. I did not know what to say. I felt torn between understanding and betrayal. I knew he had raised me with love, and I could see the pain in his eyes, the fear, the guilt, the years of carrying this secret. But I also felt that a piece of my life had been taken from me without my permission. My mother walked in then. Her eyes were red, and she looked at me like she was afraid I might break. She sat beside me and reached for my hand, but I did not take it. I could see the hurt in her face, but I could not bring myself to move. I felt frozen in place, caught between the world I knew and the world they had just revealed. She apologized. She said she was sorry for not telling me sooner. Sorry for hiding something so important. Sorry for protecting herself at the cost of my trust. Her voice trembled. She said she felt ashamed for her past and terrified that I would see her differently. I listened, but I did not know what to say. I felt like my heart had been split in two. On one side, I understood why she might have been scared. On the other side, I felt cheated. I felt like my entire life was built on a foundation I did not know was cracked. I finally stood up. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to walk toward the door. I told them I needed some air. I could hear my mother calling my name softly, but I could not stop. I walked outside and closed the door behind me. The evening air hit my face, cool and heavy, and I breathed in deeply, trying to steady myself. I walked aimlessly. I did not know where I was going. I just needed to move. I needed space. I needed to think. Every memory of my father flashed through my mind, but they felt different now. Not less real, but different. I kept asking myself what father truly meant. Was it blood? Or was it the years of love, the nights he stayed up with me, the days he worked hard to provide for us? Part of me knew the answer, but another part of me was drowning in confusion. I reached a small park near our house and sat on the swings. I had not been there in years. I remembered being a kid, swinging while my dad pushed me gently, telling me not to jump off while it was still moving. He always worried about me, sometimes more than he needed to. I remembered laughing with him. I remembered holding his hand when I was scared of thunderstorms. He felt like home. But now I wondered if he ever looked at me and saw the face of the man who hurt my mother. I wondered if he ever had moments where loving me was difficult. That thought broke something inside me. I stayed there until the sky turned dark. I did not cry. I just sat with the heaviness inside me, trying to figure out who I was now. I felt like part of me had disappeared, like a door had opened to a room in my life I never knew existed. When I finally returned home, the house was quiet. My parents were sitting in the living room, waiting for me. They looked worried. My mother stood up when I walked in, but she did not move closer. She gave me space, which I appreciated. My father asked if I was okay, but I could not give him an answer. I told them I needed time. They nodded. My father said he understood, and for the first time in hours, I believed him. He looked relieved that I had come home at all. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, just like I had before. But the silence felt different now. It felt heavier. I closed my eyes and tried to feel something. Anger, sadness, love, anything that could give me direction. But all I felt was emptiness mixed with confusion. I knew this was only the beginning. The beginning of understanding who I truly was. The beginning of confronting the past they hid from me. The beginning of rebuilding trust that had cracked beneath my feet. And somewhere inside me, even though I did not want to admit it yet, I knew I still loved them. But I also knew things would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of heaviness that makes your whole body feel tired, even after hours of sleep. I lay there for a long time, staring at the window as the light slowly filled the room. I could hear small sounds from the kitchen, cups moving, the soft clink of silverware, the usual morning noises. It was strange how normal everything sounded, almost peaceful, even though nothing inside me felt normal anymore. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. I knew I could not hide in my room forever, even though I wanted to. A part of me thought that if I stayed alone long enough, maybe the truth would feel less sharp. But another part of me knew that the longer I avoided them, the harder it would be to face them again. When I walked downstairs, my mother was at the stove. She turned the moment she heard me, her expression soft but nervous. She asked if I wanted breakfast. I said yes, mostly because it was the only thing I could think to say. She nodded and placed a plate on the table. My father sat across from the chair where I usually sat, but he did not look up. I noticed his hands were wrapped around his coffee mug, his knuckles white. The three of us sat there in a silence that felt too heavy for such an ordinary morning. I tried to eat, but every bite felt strange, like my body was going through the motions without my mind being part of it. My father finally spoke. He said he knew this was difficult. He said he did not expect forgiveness right away. He said he only hoped I could still talk to them when I was ready. I nodded a little. I did not trust my voice yet. After breakfast, I put on my shoes and walked outside again. I did not have a destination in mind. I just needed to move, to feel the air, to be away from the tension inside the house. A part of me felt grateful they were giving me space. Another part felt guilty for needing it so badly. I walked to the same park where I had been the night before. The sunlight made everything look softer. The grass, the benches, even the old playground where the paint was chipping. I sat on one of the swings again and let myself sway slowly. The motion was calming, almost like breathing. As I sat there, my mind kept going back to the truth they had told me. It felt surreal, like a story I had overheard about someone else, not about myself. I wondered about the man who was my biological father. I wondered what he looked like. I wondered if I had his eyes. I wondered if he even knew I existed. And then I wondered if I even wanted to know the answer. I felt guilty thinking about him. My father, the man who raised me, was still my father. I knew that. But there was a new piece of me now, a missing piece I had been unaware of my whole life. And that piece had suddenly been pulled into the light. I wasn't sure how to fit it into the picture of who I thought I was. A few children ran past me, laughing and chasing each other. Their voices filled the park. I watched them and thought about how different life feels when you're young, how simple everything seems until you grow old enough to understand the weight people carry. I used to think adults always knew what they were doing. Now I understood they were just human beings trying to hold their lives together, often without a guide. That thought softened something in me. I stayed at the park for hours, thinking about everything. Eventually, I decided to go home. I was not ready to have a deep conversation, but I also didn't want to push them away more than necessary. When I walked through the door, my parents were sitting on the couch together. They looked up immediately. My father's eyes were cautious, almost as if he expected me to walk right back out. Instead, I sat down across from them. My mother asked if I wanted to talk. I nodded slowly. The words did not come easily, but I spoke anyway. I told them I was confused. I told them I was hurt. I told them I felt like the ground under me had shifted. I told them I didn't know what this meant for us or for me. My voice shook more than I expected, but it felt good to let the words out rather than keep them trapped inside. My mother reached for my hand again. This time, I let her. She squeezed it gently, like she was afraid I might pull away. She told me she loved me more than anything, that the past did not change how much she cared. She said she carried shame and fear for years, and she wished she had been stronger. She said she understood if I needed time, but she hoped I would someday forgive her. Then my father spoke. He looked at me with eyes full of emotion. He said he had loved me since the day he met me. He said he never thought of me as anything but his son. He said raising me was the greatest part of his life, and he would never regret stepping into that role. But he also said he was sorry for not telling me the truth sooner. He said he underestimated how much I could handle, and he let fear make the decision for him. I listened without interrupting. I could see the honesty in their faces, the pain, the regret, the love. I told them I needed time, and they said they understood. They did not push for more. For the first time in days, I felt a small sense of relief. Not because everything was okay, it wasn't, but because we had finally opened the door to a conversation that had been locked for years. Later that night, I sat in my room and looked through the old photo albums my mother kept in the closet. I had seen them before, but now they felt different. I studied every picture, every expression, every smile. I looked at the baby photos, at my father holding me with a proud grin. He looked so happy. He looked like a man who genuinely believed he was holding his son. And in a way, he was. Biology aside, he chose me. And that choice meant something powerful. I flipped through pictures of childhood birthdays, family trips, random moments caught on camera. Every memory felt real. Every memory felt like part of my life, untouched by the truth they had hidden. That brought me some comfort. It reminded me that even though the foundation had cracked, the memories themselves were still intact. A few days passed like that, quiet, slow, filled with long stretches of thinking. My parents kept their distance but checked in gently, making sure I was eating, resting, and not shutting down completely. I appreciated it more than I expected. One afternoon, I decided to ask my father something I had been afraid to say. I found him in the backyard, trimming the bushes. I walked up to him, and he put down his tools immediately. He asked if everything was okay. I told him I didn't know, but I needed to ask him a question. I asked him if he ever wished things had been different. If he ever regretted raising a child who wasn't biologically his. I asked him if he ever looked at me and felt resentment, or if he ever felt like I reminded him of the man who hurt my mother. He went silent for a moment, and I worried I had said too much. But then he shook his head slowly. He said he never regretted it. Not once. He said he chose to be my father because he loved my mother and because he wanted a family. But over the years, loving me became something he couldn't even separate from himself. He said I was his son in every way that mattered. Then he said something that stayed with me. He said blood makes you related, but love makes you family. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away. He stepped closer and placed a hand on my shoulder. I could feel the sincerity in him. I could feel the love he had carried for years, even through fear and silence. In that moment, something inside me began to heal. Not fully, not instantly, but it started. We talked more after that. Slowly, carefully, but we talked. I asked about my biological father, what he was like, what he did, whether they knew where he was now. My mother told me pieces of what she remembered. Some parts were painful for her to say, so she spoke gently and slowly. I could see she still carried resentment and sadness from that time. The man had left without looking back. He had not asked about me. He had not shown remorse. And after a while, he had completely disappeared. A part of me felt angry at him. Another part felt strangely empty, like the absence of something I never knew I was missing had suddenly become loud. But I did not feel the desire to find him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I wasn't sure. What I did feel was a pull toward understanding myself. Not through him, but through the life I had already lived. Through the parents who raised me, flawed and human as they were. Through the truth that was finally out in the open. The days slowly grew easier. Not simple, but easier. I found moments where I could talk to my parents without feeling overwhelmed. We laughed a few times. We shared meals that didn't feel as heavy as before. Trust was not fully restored, but the cracks were no longer spreading. Instead, they were beginning to heal, piece by piece. And somewhere deep inside me, I started to realize something important. The truth had hurt me, yes, but it had also opened a door to understanding, to healing, to seeing my parents not as perfect protectors, but as human beings who tried their best, even when they were scared. And that realization would shape everything that came next. After those days of quiet reflection, I began noticing small shifts in myself. I caught myself smiling at things that once felt ordinary. The way sunlight hit the living room floor, the scent of fresh bread my mother baked, the faint rustle of leaves outside my window. I realized these moments hadn't changed, but my perception had. My world felt different because I was learning to carry the truth instead of letting it weigh me down. One evening, I found my father sitting alone in the backyard. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, and the air had that calm, almost sacred stillness that only comes before nightfall. He didn't speak at first. We simply sat together on the worn wooden bench, side by side. It felt peaceful, yet heavy with all the words that had been spoken and left unspoken over the past week. Finally, I broke the silence. "Dad," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Do you ever regret anything?" The question hung in the air like mist. He didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head toward the horizon, watching the last bits of sunlight disappear behind the trees. I could see him choosing his words carefully, as if each one carried the weight of decades. "I regret not telling you sooner," he said eventually. "And I regret the years you might have felt distance between us because of a secret I carried. But I do not regret raising you. You made me a better man than I was capable of being before you came into my life." Hearing him say that stirred something inside me I hadn't expected, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a new kind of gratitude. I realized that while the truth had shattered some of the foundations I thought were solid, it also illuminated the love that had existed all along, steady and unwavering. Days turned into weeks, and the house slowly resumed a rhythm that felt familiar but not identical to before. There were still quiet moments where I would catch my mother staring into the distance, or my father sighing as if remembering the burden they'd carried. And there were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the emptiness that had been seeded by years of secrets. But over time, the emptiness began to thin. It became less of a void and more of a space where understanding could grow. I began asking questions, not about the man who had left, but about my parents themselves. I asked about their pasts, their struggles, and the moments when they doubted themselves as parents. They spoke more freely than they had in years, sharing pieces of themselves they had kept hidden. I learned about my father's childhood, the hardships he endured, and the mistakes he had made before meeting my mother. I learned about my mother's fears, the nights she cried herself to sleep, and the strength it took to carry on when life had been cruel to her. Through these conversations, I began to see them not as perfect guardians, but as human beings, flawed, scared, resilient, and deeply loving. It was a revelation that reshaped my understanding of family. Love, I realized, is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up, day after day, even when the weight of the world or your own regrets threatens to crush you. One afternoon, I sat alone in the living room, flipping through old letters my parents had saved. Some were from friends, others from distant relatives, and a few were handwritten notes they had exchanged when they were younger. I paused on one from my father to my mother, written years before I was born. The words were simple, heartfelt. I will always be here, no matter what life brings. The simplicity of the sentence struck me. It contained more love than any grand gesture could, and I realized that the same promise had been kept for me all along, silently, consistently, in the form of their care, their guidance, and their unwavering presence. As I reflected on these moments, I began to confront the anger and betrayal I had felt. It didn't vanish immediately, but it became manageable. I understood that my parents had been trying to protect me in the only way they knew how. Their secrecy had been misguided, yes, but it had not been born from cruelty. And that realization gave me room to breathe, to feel, and eventually, to forgive. There were days when I still felt the sting of the truth, when the realization that my life had been constructed on half-lies made my stomach turn. But I noticed that those moments grew shorter and less consuming. They became like shadows at the edges of my consciousness, present, but no longer dominating my world. One evening, my mother asked me to sit with her in the kitchen. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow through the window. She handed me a small, worn box. Inside were photographs I had never seen. Pictures of her as a child, her family, and even one of her with the man who had fathered me biologically. I studied the photos carefully, noting expressions, small gestures, the way she carried herself. There was sadness there, yes, but also resilience and a quiet dignity I had never fully appreciated. "Look," she said softly, "this is my story. Every piece of it shaped who I am. And it shaped you, too, in ways I hope you'll understand someday." I nodded, holding back tears. There was a heaviness in the room, yes, but also a strange warmth. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of connection, not just to my parents, but to the larger narrative of our lives. I realized that our shared history was not just about secrets and pain. It was also about survival, love, and the choices we make to protect one another, even when imperfectly executed. In the following weeks, I began to see my parents through a lens of compassion I hadn't known I possessed. I noticed the small sacrifices they had made for me, the sleepless nights, the extra hours at work, the patience and understanding they offered me in moments when I felt unworthy or lost. I started to internalize the lessons they had tried to impart all along, not through words, but through actions. And then came the day I finally asked them the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. "Do you think I'm different because of this?" I meant the revelation about my biological father, the years of secrecy, the shadows that had hung over our family. My father's response was gentle but firm. "You are the same person you were before we told you," he said. "The truth doesn't change who you are. It only gives you the chance to see the world more clearly and to choose what kind of person you want to be." I thought about that long after the words had been spoken. It was a moment of clarity, a realization that life is not about what is hidden or revealed, but about how we respond to it. We are shaped by both the truths we know and the secrets we uncover. And ultimately, we define ourselves not by our origins, but by our choices, our empathy, and the love we give and receive. Over time, the house became a place of tentative normalcy again. Conversations flowed more freely, laughter returned in small doses, and the tension that had once felt omnipresent began to ease. We still had our private struggles, our moments of doubt and reflection, but they no longer felt insurmountable. They were part of the fabric of our lives, a testament to our resilience, our imperfections, and our commitment to one another. I also started to reflect on my own identity in a deeper way. Knowing my biological father's existence did not diminish my love for the man who raised me. It did not undo the memories we had shared or the lessons he had taught me. Instead, it offered perspective, a reminder that life is complex, that people make difficult choices, and that love is not always simple. I realized that I could carry both truths, the one of my upbringing and the one of my origins, without letting either define me completely. I began keeping a journal, writing down memories, thoughts, and emotions. I documented the ordinary and the extraordinary alike, the mornings with my mother baking, the evenings watching sunsets with my father, the quiet moments when the house felt still, and the revelations that had reshaped my understanding of family. Writing became a way to process, to integrate, and to honor the journey I had been on. And slowly, I started to forgive, not just my parents, but also myself. I forgave myself for feeling anger, for feeling betrayal, for struggling to accept the truth. I forgave myself for needing time to heal, for moments of doubt, and for the fear that had shadowed my life. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about forgetting or excusing. It was about releasing the grip of pain and making room for understanding and compassion. One afternoon, as I sat with my parents in the living room, I noticed the quiet strength that had always been there, but which I had only begun to appreciate. My father smiled gently at me, not in the way that demanded perfection or obedience, but in the way that simply acknowledged presence, love, and continuity. My mother's eyes held warmth and relief, as if our shared journey toward truth had brought us closer than we had ever been before. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Life's truth can hurt, and secrets can fracture trust, but they can also create opportunities for deeper understanding, for authentic connection, and for growth that might never have been possible otherwise. As the weeks passed, I began noticing the subtle ways my parents had shaped who I had become, ways I had taken for granted until now. The patience my father had instilled in me, the empathy my mother had modeled through her actions, the quiet lessons embedded in everyday routines. They were all pieces of a foundation I had never realized was so strong. Even with the revelation of my origins, I felt an unexpected sense of continuity. The past had shifted, yes, but the essence of my life, the love and care that had guided me, remained intact. I started to venture into the world outside with a different mindset. I spoke to friends, colleagues, even casual acquaintances, and found myself reflecting on my experiences in a more nuanced way. I began to notice that many people carried invisible burdens, truths left unspoken, pasts they hadn't revealed, or pains they had hidden. And it struck me how common it was for humans to act from fear, guilt, or a desire to protect. Suddenly, my parents' secrecy didn't feel like a betrayal alone. It felt human. One afternoon, I returned to the park where I had gone the first time after learning the truth. The swings were empty, but the air carried the faint scent of grass and early autumn leaves. I sat on the edge of a bench, staring at the ground, thinking about all that had happened. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in shades of amber and violet, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of everything. Anger, sorrow, confusion, gratitude, and love, all tangled together. I realized that part of healing wasn't forgetting. It wasn't pretending that the past hadn't hurt. It was integrating the experiences into the story of who I was and choosing how to move forward. I thought about forgiveness again, not as an obligation, but as an act of liberation. Forgiving my parents didn't erase the hurt, but it allowed me to see them as they truly were, as humans who had done the best they could under circumstances that were far from simple. Later that week, I had a conversation with my father that changed the way I viewed him entirely. We were sitting in the backyard, the cool breeze rustling the trees around us. I asked him if he had ever doubted himself as a father, whether he had ever wondered if he could truly love someone who wasn't biologically his. He paused, and I watched the muscles in his face tighten as memories seemed to pass behind his eyes. I questioned myself, he admitted, many times. But the moment I held you in my arms, I knew it didn't matter whose blood you carried. What mattered was that I loved you, and I would fight every day to protect and guide you. That decision has been the truest part of my life. Hearing him speak so openly, so vulnerably, stirred something deep within me. I understood, more fully than ever, that love is a choice. It is not always effortless, and it is not always clean or simple, but it is powerful, sustaining, and transformative. That day, I began to see my father not just as a parental figure, but as a man who had carried immense responsibility and had chosen love over fear every single day. My mother and I also grew closer in ways I had never anticipated. She shared stories from her youth, of moments when she had felt completely alone, of mistakes she had made, of the nights she had cried herself to sleep. I listened without judgment, only compassion. And in return, she listened to my fears, my frustrations, and the lingering questions about identity and belonging. Our conversations were raw and honest, a new layer of intimacy forming between us. Through these interactions, I began to feel a sense of clarity emerging. The revelation of my biological father had not destroyed my identity, it had expanded it. I understood that family is defined not only by blood but by choices, presence, and love. And while secrets had once clouded that understanding, the truth now illuminated it, giving me a chance to see my parents and myself in a more complete light. I also started exploring my own reflections in solitude. I would take long walks in the evening, observing the world with a newfound awareness. I noticed the people walking their dogs, the children playing, the couples holding hands, the solitary figures staring out over rivers or benches. I wondered about their hidden truths, the burdens they carried silently. And I realized that life, for everyone, is a mosaic of joy and pain, truth and secrecy, love and imperfection. Understanding this gave me a kind of peace I hadn't expected. One night, I woke up and found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the journey we had been through as a family. The house was silent, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious or trapped. I felt reflective. I thought about all the moments that had led to this point. The first revelations, the quiet confrontations, the tentative conversations, the shared silences. Each had been painful, yet each had contributed to a new understanding, a new connection. I realized then that life isn't about perfection. It's about navigating the imperfections, finding the strength to face truths, and choosing how to respond. My parents had acted imperfectly, but with love at their core. I had responded imperfectly, but with the desire to understand and heal. And in that shared imperfection, we found a path forward. Over time, I also began to think about forgiveness in a broader sense. I considered the man who had fathered me biologically, the one my mother had spoken about with such caution and sorrow. I felt a mix of anger, indifference, and curiosity. But I knew that my life was not defined by him. It was defined by the family who had raised me, the love that had nurtured me, and the choices I made every day. Letting go of resentment toward him didn't excuse him, it freed me. As months passed, the house felt lighter. Conversations were easier, laughter more frequent, and trust began to rebuild, slowly but surely. I realized that healing is a process, not an event. It is not a single moment of revelation, but a series of steps, choices, and reflections that shape the way we experience life and relationships. I also began to share parts of my story with close friends. I was surprised by how humanizing it felt to speak openly about my experiences. People responded with empathy, curiosity, and sometimes their own stories of secrets and revelations. Speaking about it out loud transformed my pain into understanding. It reminded me that while our individual experiences are unique, the struggle to navigate love, loss, and truth is universal. And then there were quiet evenings where my parents and I would sit together without speaking, simply enjoying each other's presence. I noticed how much comfort came from shared silence, from knowing that even without words, connection existed. It was in those moments I realized that love is often quiet, persistent, and steadfast. It doesn't always announce itself dramatically. It simply remains, even when imperfect, even when complicated, even when shadowed by secrets. I began journaling more consistently, capturing memories, reflections, and realizations. I wrote about the first moments of truth, the days of uncertainty, the gradual rebuilding of trust, and the insights that came from observing my parents and reflecting on my own emotions. Writing became both a mirror and a compass, a way to understand the past, navigate the present, and prepare for the future. And as I wrote, I also began imagining the kind of person I wanted to be. I thought about the lessons my parents had taught me, sometimes through words, sometimes through actions. I thought about the strength it took to raise a child under imperfect circumstances and the courage it required to admit mistakes. I thought about the compassion I wanted to show, the patience I wanted to practice, and the integrity I hoped to carry into my own life. Slowly, I began to see that the revelation of my origins, while painful, had ultimately offered me a gift, the gift of clarity, empathy, and a deeper understanding of love. It forced me to confront the complexity of human relationships, to wrestle with betrayal and forgiveness, and to recognize the profound value of choice in shaping a family. As time went on, I began noticing subtle changes in the way I related to my parents. I could feel the tension that had once existed slowly dissolving, replaced with a quiet comfort. It wasn't instantaneous. There were still moments when old fears and doubts crept in, when I found myself questioning whether the love we shared could survive the weight of secrets. But those moments became less frequent, and each time they appeared, I felt more equipped to face them, more willing to sit with the discomfort and see it through. One rainy afternoon, I found myself in my father's study. He was sitting at his desk, flipping through an old ledger, the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. I didn't want to interrupt, but I also felt a need to connect, to share something I had been holding on to quietly. I told him that I had been thinking a lot about what he said, that blood doesn't make family, love does. I told him I understood now, more fully than ever, what that meant. He looked up, his eyes soft and understanding. It's not always easy to grasp, he said, and it's not always easy to live by. But every time you choose to care, to forgive, to love, you prove that it matters more than anything else. His words lingered with me long after that day. I began noticing how much of our lives were built on these quiet, almost invisible choices, the acts of kindness, the willingness to forgive, the patience to stay when leaving would have been easier. These small, deliberate actions had shaped my existence far more than any grand gestures ever could. I also began to reflect on my mother's role in all of this. She had carried immense burdens in silence, protecting me from truths she feared would hurt me. I realized how much courage it had taken to make those choices, even when the consequences were uncertain. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, baking as she often did. I asked her what she had felt the day she decided to keep the secret. She paused, flour dusting her hands, and then spoke softly. I was terrified, she admitted. I thought I was protecting you, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt us all in the long run. I thought love alone was enough, but sometimes love must be paired with honesty. Her words resonated deeply. I realized that love without transparency can become a fragile thing, easily broken by omission or fear. But I also saw that honesty, even delayed, could create healing when paired with intention and care. That understanding shaped the way I approach my relationships, not just with my parents, but with others around me. As the months passed, I began reconnecting with parts of myself that had been overshadowed by confusion and hurt. I spent more time outdoors, walking, reflecting, and observing life around me. I started writing letters, not to send, but to document my thoughts and emotions, to release them from the weight of memory and into words. These exercises allowed me to process my feelings with clarity and compassion, helping me see the full spectrum of human experience, including my own. I also found moments of joy in the simplest of experiences. Watching the sun rise, hearing birds sing in the morning, sharing a quiet meal with my parents. These moments became reminders that life is composed of countless small acts of beauty and connection. And in recognizing that, I began to feel gratitude again, a steady warmth that had been buried beneath confusion and pain. One day, I revisited my mother's old photo albums. I lingered on pictures I had once looked at without understanding, now seeing them through a lens of empathy and love. Each photograph told a story, not just of my parents' past, but of the life they had built, the sacrifices they had made, and the resilience that had carried us through difficult times. I realized that family is not a static thing. It is an evolving story, shaped by choices, love, mistakes, and reconciliation. In those quiet reflections, I also confronted my own fears about identity. Knowing about my biological father did not diminish the love I had for my parents. Rather, it expanded my understanding of who I was. I was the sum of many influences, my parents' love, my experiences, the lessons I had learned, and even the challenges I had faced. And I understood that identity is not defined solely by blood, but by the depth of connection, the choices we make, and the values we carry forward. Through this process, I began to rebuild my sense of trust, not just in my parents, but in life itself. I realized that even in the face of secrets and mistakes, it is possible to find honesty, love, and resilience. Trust is fragile, yes, but it is also renewable, nurtured through consistent action, communication, and the willingness to remain present even when it is difficult. One evening, I sat with my father on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. I told him I was beginning to understand the depth of his love and the courage it had taken to raise me as his own. He reached out, placing a hand on mine, and simply said, "It's always been there, and it always will be." Those words became a kind of anchor for me. They reminded me that love, though tested and complicated, has the power to endure. And that understanding gave me hope, not just for my relationship with my parents, but for my ability to form meaningful connections throughout my life. In the following weeks, our family routines began to feel natural again. We laughed more, shared stories, and occasionally sat in reflective silence, comfortable in each other's presence. The atmosphere of secrecy and tension gradually faded, replaced by something quieter, more profound. Mutual respect, love, and understanding forged through honesty and perseverance. I also started considering how I would carry these lessons forward. I wanted to approach my relationships with the same combination of empathy, patience, and transparency that I had witnessed in my parents' struggles. I wanted to be present for others, even when it was difficult. I wanted to build connections that were honest, resilient, and nurturing. And I realized that these choices, though small, could shape a life just as profoundly as any revelation or crisis. There were still moments of doubt, evenings when memories of confusion and hurt resurfaced, but I learned to sit with those feelings without letting them control me. I wrote about them, spoke about them, and reflected on them, transforming raw emotion into understanding. And in that process, I discovered the depth of my own resilience, the capacity to hold pain and love simultaneously, and the ability to grow from experiences that once felt overwhelmingly painful. As the seasons changed, I found myself revisiting the park where I had first gone to process the truth. The swings were worn, the trees tall and steady, and the air carried a gentle calm. I sat on the bench, observing life around me, the children playing, the couples walking, the elderly sitting in quiet reflection. And I realized that life moves forward, carrying both joy and sorrow, secrets and revelations, love and loss. I thought about my own journey, the fear, the confusion, the heartbreak, and the slow emergence of understanding and forgiveness. I understood that my parents' love had been a constant, even when obscured by secrecy, and that the truth had ultimately allowed me to see that love in its full complexity. And I felt a sense of peace, not complete, but enough to move forward with clarity and hope. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking less about the hurt and more about the lessons. I began to notice patterns in my family's life, small but meaningful choices they had made that shaped who I was today. My father's patience, my mother's resilience, the quiet sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, they were the scaffolding of my own identity. And I began to see that life isn't about being shielded from pain. It's about learning how to navigate it, to grow through it, and to let it inform the way we love and connect with others. I also realized that my understanding of family had transformed. Family is not only defined by shared bloodlines or past mistakes. It is defined by presence, commitment, and the willingness to forgive. It is built on countless small acts of care, on moments when love is chosen over fear, understanding over judgment, and patience over resentment. And I began to appreciate that this realization wasn't abstract. It was lived every day through the choices my parents made for me and with me. One quiet afternoon, I walked through the old neighborhood where I had grown up. The streets seemed the same, but I saw them differently now. Each corner, each tree, each house held memories, some joyful, some painful, but all part of the tapestry of my life. I thought about the secrets that had once shadowed my family, and I understood that they were not unique to us. Every family carries burdens, hidden truths, and mistakes. What mattered was how we confronted them, how we allowed love and understanding to guide us through. I started spending more time with my parents, intentionally seeking their company, listening to their stories, and sharing my own reflections. We spoke about simple things, the meals we enjoyed, the books we read, the moments that made us laugh, but also about profound experiences, the regrets, the fears, and the quiet realizations that had shaped our journey. And in those conversations, I felt a connection deeper than I had ever known. It was not perfect, but it was authentic, and that authenticity mattered more than anything else. Through all of this, I began to notice the impact on myself. I became more patient, more empathetic, more willing to see beyond immediate emotions to the complexities of human experience. I recognize that anger and betrayal are natural responses to hurt, but they do not define the totality of a relationship. Love, when paired with honesty and effort, can persist even in the wake of deception. I carried this understanding with me, applying it not only to my parents but also to friends, colleagues, and the broader world.